Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, Site Visits in Depth. For those of you on Twitter, you can follow along and join the conversation by tweeting to @JTFN or using the hashtag #TeenPhilanthropy. During this webinar, we're going to hear from Sarah Indyk, Philanthropic Initiatives Manager at Rose Youth Foundation. And we're going to paste her full bio in the chat box so that you can learn more about Sarah and all the work that she's done. And now, before we take any more time, I'm going to actually turn the call over to Sarah. So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks. Hi, everyone, and thank you all for joining this call, and a big thank you to Naomi and Stephanie and Andrew and the Jewish Teen Funders Network for inviting me to be a part of it. This is my 7th year working with Rose Youth Foundation, and it is one of my favorite parts of the work that I get to do here at Rose Community Foundation. So it's always a treat to get to talk about the work we do. Rose Community Foundation, for those of you who don't know much about us, we are a community foundation based in Denver, Colorado. The bulk of our unrestricted grant making funds Jewish life, education, aging, child and family development, and health in the 7-county Denver Metro Boulder community. We also house donor-advised funds and work with collaborative giving groups like Rose Youth Foundation. Our youth foundation is a group of 23 10th through 12th graders, and they work together from November through May to grant $60,000 to address the issues that they feel are most pressing in our local community. And the only other requirement really placed on their work is that they make grants that reflect what it means to them to give in a primarily Jewish way. Site visits have always been a part of Rose Youth Foundation, but I should start with the caveat that we have always had a fairly similar approach to site visits, and it's worked really well for us, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. But we will also have a couple of moments in the conversation where we'll open it up to hear from a few other folks about the way that they approach their work too, to get a couple different ideas into the mix. So the reason that we have always included site visits in our work with Rose Youth Foundation is that they really help to bring the grant making process to life for teens. I'm going to cover today a bit about the value of site visits, some of the logistical considerations and challenges to overcome if you're thinking about incorporating a site visit component into your program. And I'll try to talk both on the sort of conceptual level and on the really tactical implementation level as well. But probably what we'll have time for is really kind of an overview, and I'm really happy to take the conversation further with anyone who'd like to offline afterwards by email or on the phone, or if you're ever in Denver in person. So here's what we're going to cover today, and we'll save some time at the end of the conversation for questions. But before we get started, let's get a little bit of a sense of who's on the line and how site visits may already play into the work that you do. So we have a poll here, and what we'd love to know is, does your program incorporate any of the following? So phone calls or Skype calls between teens and prospective grantees. These could be one-on-one or kind of group calls. Site visits to meet with prospective grantees at their offices before funding decisions are made. Presentations by prospective grantees at your meetings. Or follow-up site visits after funding decisions have been made to either see a funded program in action or to volunteer with a grantee organization. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to select their answer. Naomi, do you want to show the results?
I'm just waiting for the answers to come in. They're still tallying. All right.
Great.
Still going.
And can people check more than one at this point, or is it just one? Okay. So we'll do another poll at the end of the conversation too, and for that one you also can check more than one.
So I think we have the final answers now. Everyone should see. Oh, they're still coming. You should see it up on the screen.
Okay, so I'm going to click results because
you don't see the results?
I was seeing it, but maybe everybody else was.
Oh.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the results now. So many of you, the most of all actually, are incorporating presentations by potential grantees. That's weighing in at 90% at the moment. Some of you have those presentations over the phone. A little under half of the folks on this call are incorporating site visits before grant making, and just a couple are incorporating site visits after funding decisions. So what I would love to do now is ask if we could have one volunteer from each of these categories just briefly share, 30 seconds or less, your name, the program you're with, and the benefits that you see from the approach that you take. Do we have a volunteer?
So if you would like to volunteer to talk about one of these categories that you fit into, please press *7. It will unmute you, and then you can speak. We'll hear you.
Hi, this is Celeste from the Jewish Community Youth Foundation in Princeton, New Jersey. Our group conducts on-site site visits where the students visit the different organizations. And I think it really, first of all, sets the tone of what kind of presentation this is, where the teens dress up, they're in a boardroom, they're speaking with one or a few different staff members in person about the project. They can actually sometimes visually see where the programs are being held. Sometimes they meet with recipients or other volunteers of the programs. And in our experience, it's been very beneficial for the students, again, one, to travel outside their community and see the different locations, and two, and interact with the staff sort of on their turf.
Great. Thank you, Celeste.
This is Sarah from the JCC on the Palisades. So we typically mostly do presentations by the grantees at our own facility. And this is merely because we used to also do site visits at the locations of the grantees. But we just found it was too difficult to get all of our students there. And we felt that having 10 out of our 30 students wasn't worth the experience, because those who didn't go felt very left out of the opportunity. So we do everything in-house at this point, and we do have a great opportunity where most of the presenters will bring a video. We ask them to make a video before they come of their facility so the students can see it. Some bring in people who have been affected by either a grant or by the organization, and they bring in different things that they can look at, touch, etc., so that they can understand the organization a little better.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Celeste.
So is there anyone that could speak to using technology for these conversations, Skype or phone calls?
Again, if you want to contribute to the conversation, press *7. I see someone.
Hi, so this is Lum Friedman out in San Francisco at the Jewish Teen Foundation. We do Skype presentations for potential grantees who are in Israel typically. So if they don't have a local representative, a lay leader, or a friends of person locally who can come meet with us, which we still prefer, we allow them to do Skype presentations. But I will say that while the technology is great and allows for things that wouldn't otherwise be possible, it's still very difficult with a little bit of time delay, so people end up asking questions, waiting, and by the time the answer starts to come in, people are asking the question again. It's not as ideal, and so we still permit it, but we are moving towards recommending our Israeli grantees to simply just create a video, because then they can send it to us in advance, we can test it out, and we know it runs in good time well, and we're moving away from Skype for those reasons. But I'd be interested in seeing if anyone else is having more success with international Skype calls.
That sounds
Nice.
like a great conversation for our 20-minute follow-up too.
Yes, exactly. So stay tuned for more on that. And finally, is there anyone who, it looks like this may be just one person or maybe two, who take their teens to go on site visits after funding decisions have been made?
Again, *7 to unmute yourself. I think we had 10 poll respondents, although we have a few more people on the call. And so I think it was one person at 10%.
Okay, so well, we don't have to put anyone on the spot
No.
terribly, but that can also be a great option. And I will just say briefly that one of, depending on the type of grantee organization you have, one nice option at that point can be volunteering with the nonprofit and adding the teens' energy and talent to the treasure that they have provided in their grant dollars. So there really are a lot of different ways to incorporate site visits and meetings with grantees into a youth philanthropy process that can be really helpful. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, which you've sort of already started to get a snapshot of from folks who shared their experiences. And today I'll be speaking about our approach specifically, but just also know that Naomi is an incredible resource to everyone on this call, because she has a very broad perspective on the different ways that programs can incorporate meetings, presentations, and you should feel free to ask her questions at the end of this presentation as well when we open it up for questions. So why site visit? This slide has a couple of quotes from some of our past Rose Youth Foundation members about what the site visit experience meant to them. And we really believe that site visits are an important part of any grant-making process because they add a level of authenticity and depth to the team's grant-making experience. And so we continue to do them because teens tell us that they are one of their favorite and one of the most meaningful aspects of their Rose Youth Foundation experience. Perhaps most importantly of all, we tend to encourage our teens to approach their grant making with the rigor and professionalism that a foundation approaches it with. And so site visits are also a really important part of the due diligence process in reviewing grants, so that teens can get a sense of the leadership, can probe on any areas of a grant proposal that are vague or unclear, and ultimately make very informed grants. But site visits aren't just a good grant-making practice. They're also very much a reflection of Jewish teachings and concepts. Here are a couple of texts that speak to the learning and questioning that can happen on site visits. One of my favorites, "Who is wise? He who learns from every person." And also Abraham Joshua Heschel, "We are closer to God when we are asking questions than when we think we have the answers." And site visits really are a fabulous opportunity to question some of our assumptions, because something can look great on paper and can turn out to be very different in person. So seeking to wrestle with ideas and seeking to learn really are fundamental Jewish concepts. And that is the purpose of any good site visit. There's a story that I wanted to share with you also about the Nobel Prize-winning scientist Isidore Isaac Rabi, who is Jewish. When he was a child, apparently when his mother would greet him after school each day, she didn't say, "Did you learn anything today?" or "Did you have a good day?" She said, "Did you ask any good questions today?" And the process of closely reading a grant proposal and determining good questions to ask in preparation for a site visit is a wonderful part of the kind of critical thinking and learning process that youth philanthropy can provide for teens. I'll share with you a couple of other stories. So for a lot of our teens, site visits are the moment when grant making work and the difference that their grant making can make becomes real for them. last year I accompanied a group of teens on a site visit to a refugee serving organization. And after the teens had met with the director of the job readiness program, she took them to see a class in action. They entered a small classroom with one table, about 8 adult students who were all refugees recently arrived in Denver, one teacher who was working with the class on job interview skills. The students were from all over the world. They spoke all different languages. Many spoke multiple languages, and some had advanced degrees or other valuable work experience, but they were all English language learners, and none had experienced an American job interview and all of the customs that come along with it. After the site visit, the teens who had been there talked about how seeing this class in action gave them a completely different perspective on the importance of the work that they were considering funding and the true challenges that refugees must overcome. It was very different than just reading it on paper. Another example of what our teens have experienced on site visits is a young woman who was a part of Rose Youth Foundation who talked about how empowering it was to be able to ask adults questions about their work and to be taken seriously as a young person. She also said that site visits gave her a whole different perspective on what she should do and say in college interviews and how she should respond to questions that she's asked, from having the chance to be the interviewer rather than the interviewee. Finally, site visits really give everyone a chance to see if the proposal reflects reality and to gauge the quality and dynamism of a leader and to get a feel for whether something that looks good on paper is actually the real deal in person. So let me show you where site visits fit into the process. This is the beginning of the part of this presentation where I'll talk a little bit about how to make site visits happen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on our overall cycle, but this is it in a nutshell. And basically in March, our teams receive grant proposals. So if you look at the first purple box that appears, that's March. And in the past, we've site visited all or nearly all applicant organizations, which usually amounts to between 20 and 30 site visits, with about 4 members attending each one. The teens sign up for the site visits that they want to participate in, and no one goes on all 30. But typically they go on, somewhere between 3 and 7. This year, we're going to start with a first read and review by the whole group to select finalist organizations to receive site visits. That meeting will also happen in March, and then in late March and April, our teams will go on site visits in small groups and then reconvene for a final retreat at which they'll share what they learned on site visits and make final funding decisions. So for us this year probably will be closer to the kind of 15 to 20 end of the spectrum than the 30 site visit experience we've typically had in the past, and I'm happy to talk later about why we're making that shift if that's of interest to people. So that's where site visits fit. And now, if you're thinking about incorporating site visits, a little bit of information about preparing teens to go on site visits. So I'm going to talk briefly about logistics, about preparing the organizations, and also about preparing the teens. And this picture is because really it's somewhere between a military operation and like conducting a symphony. And this was a much cuter picture than any pictures I could find of military operations. So logistical tips. First of all, if you're going to include site visits, you'll do yourself a big favor by asking organizations to give you their availability as far in advance as possible. So we ask when organizations submit a grant proposal for dates and times that they could meet with our teams. Historically, that's resulted in a site visit schedule of about 20 or 30 site visits. Try to schedule around school breaks and events that you know your teams are already committed to. Excel can be incredibly helpful in this process. Even once you get the information from nonprofits about all of their availability, matching that with your team's availability is a little bit of a puzzle. And if you like puzzles, then you will love that job. And if you don't like puzzles, it could be a good opportunity to recruit a teen intern or volunteer to help you, because there can be a lot of moving pieces to coordinate. For us, not all teens go on every site visit. They go in small groups of 4 or 5 students. And we bring them a tentative site visit schedule that's prepared based on the organization's availability, and then have them sign up for the site visits that they're interested in attending, but also based on the dates and times that they know that they're available. And sometimes we encourage students to be a specialist in proposals that align with one of their grant priorities. Or we encourage them to go on site visits with organizations that they may be somewhat skeptical about, not necessarily just the proposals that seem most exciting to them. We do cap each site visit at 4 or 5 teens, and that's because it tends to make a better experience for everyone and provide each student who's on the site visit a bit more of an opportunity to engage and to ask questions and to be a part of the conversation rather than just to be observers. It also means that everyone can fit in one car, which can make life a little bit easier for you if you are the person driving that car. We have one staff person attend each site visit, and I'll talk a little bit more about the role of staff beyond driving the car later on in the presentation. But my one other logistical tip is to ask the organizations you're meeting with for very specific arrival instructions, because they may take for granted that people know how to find their office or their building or where to park or how to enter the building, but sometimes that's a lot less clear than it may seem to them. Other tips on preparing organizations for site visits. Be sure that the meeting that you're setting up is with the people that your teens are really going to want to talk to based on the proposal that's been submitted. So who are the key program people, the people who will be responsible for executing the project that your teens are considering funding? Is there someone who's experienced the program who should be a part of the conversation? Be sure to tell the organizations what to expect in terms of the number of teens who will be attending, how long you'd like to meet with them, and the purpose of the meeting. But we also think that it's really important to convey right off the bat that this is a meeting that's being requested by the members of your group, by the teens themselves, and that you are their liaison in setting it up, but it's not that it's your meeting and you happen to be bringing some young people along with you. Preparing the teens is the other side of the coin. So it's really important for them to know the purpose of the site visit that they're attending. And for us, we have some new members and some returning members each year in Rose Youth Foundation. And preparing for site visits is a fabulous role for returning members in a lot of different ways. So most of the teen preparation actually happens teen to teen, not staff to teen for us. So they tell their peers the reason that they're going on a site visit. They also tell their peers how to prepare and what to do and not to do. And this little do's and don'ts list comes from what has become an institution in Rose Youth Foundation, which is the Site Visit from Hell skit, in which returning members will plan and act out for their peers a worst case scenario site visit in which literally everything goes wrong on every possible level, and it's very entertaining, and has been much more effective, I think, in getting teens to show up prepared and professionally dressed and with a copy of the proposal and ready to make the most of the conversation than simply telling them, like, here are all the things you have to do to go on a site visit. So that's a great role for returning members to play too, if you happen to have teens in your group who've been a part of the process before. A few other things that teens need to know and do to prepare. they need to know as much as they can about the organization that they're meeting with. So if you have grant proposals for them to review, they should have read that in advance. They need to work together to come up with an agenda for the meeting so they can use their time effectively and plan out all of the questions that everyone has. This may include questions from teams who are not on the site visit. The site visit team itself is really, they're a group of emissaries. It's their job to get everyone's questions answered, not just their own. We encourage teams to think about how to build rapport up front, how to ease into the site visit, and to start with more open-ended, general questions to get a sense of the people that they're talking to. And then if they have questions, as they frequently have in the past, about potentially budget inaccuracies or more challenging topics, to save those for later in the conversation and to practice asking them to each other with some diplomacy. We also encourage them to make sure that everyone will have a role in the conversation and a chance to participate. This is a list of general questions that you could use to help teams brainstorm questions for site visits. Or you could even use some of these questions. For our teams, the questions that they ask on site visits really tend to be pretty specifically related to the proposal that they're reviewing. But this list of questions can be helpful for a group that's going on a site visit when they maybe have not received a grant proposal in advance. They may have a list of organizations that they're considering supporting and they're trying to learn more about. And these kinds of questions can be really helpful for that more general conversation. Once you actually get in the door and are at the grantee organization and ready to have your site visit, this is kind of generally the flow that it takes. So the teams start by introducing themselves and reviewing the agenda and the goals for the meeting. If there's an opportunity to tour the facilities or observe a program in action, sometimes that comes at the beginning of the visit. It can also come on the tail end after the kind of meeting portion has taken place. Time for questions and discussion, organizing questions so that they start with the easier ones, and then closing and next steps, in which it's really helpful for your teams to be able to tell the nonprofit the date by which they'll make a funding decision, what their next steps will look like, how they'll use the information that they've gained at the meeting. And this is also a great opportunity for teams to experience, a functional and well-run and effective meeting and to be the ones in charge of making it so. As staff, you're in charge of a couple of important things: making sure everyone knows where they're going, how they're going to get there, what they're supposed to do when they arrive. And as we approach site visits, that's basically it. That's sort of the limit of our responsibilities. The teams are in charge of everything else. And in the words of one of my favorite teachers, Yoni Gordis, you may need to learn to make yourself translucent. Which means that if you are the adult in the room and you're at an organization where their representatives are adults, they will probably defer to you. Not your teens, but the people that you're meeting with. They may tend to address their questions to you. And your teens may then end up deferring to you as well, which is a dynamic that you don't necessarily want to encourage on a site visit that really is their show to run. And so we've found that simply body language can actually make a huge difference in the amount of space that you as the adult take up in the room. So if your eye contact is primarily with the teens that you have brought to the meeting rather than with the staff that you're meeting with, that can help deflect questions and tell your teams, without you having to say it verbally, that they're in charge, that it's up to them. If you can sit a little further back in your seat, not make yourself, not remove yourself from the conversation, but lean out a little bit rather than leaning in, even if you're taking notes. that can help make you translucent and let the teens really take charge. There may be occasional times you have to intervene if something is really going awry, and you just sort of have to trust your gut about that. But a lot of times your teens can really handle it. Sometimes on site visits, you will feel like this, so proud of your teens and really impressed with their ability to carry off the conversation. There may be other times that you feel more like this or even like this. And as a staff person, it's really important to develop a good poker face and to learn to give constructive feedback, praising the things that went really well after the meeting is over, and when there's something that didn't go well, raising it as a conversation and talking about how it could look different next time. So that leads me into talking about debriefing and how the information gathered on a site visit can be useful. Ideally, you'll have time right after a site visit in a coffee shop or outdoors in a nearby park if the weather is nice to have a conversation with the teens. And this can be another time for staff to potentially be a little bit more involved in the conversation than you would in the site visit itself. You want to be sure that you're somewhere that's private enough for the group to really share their candid reflections and talk about what they heard and what they learned. This is a time for you as a staff person to really be actively engaged in listening to the teens' takeaways, but to also add some of your own observations or questions if there's something really significant that you feel like isn't being covered. We at this point have teens fill out a rubric together, and that generates a score for each proposal. And so I wanted to ask at this point in the conversation if other people use any sort of scoring tool or rubric or evaluation tool. So go ahead and note your answers here. Do your teens use any kind of review tool, a rubric, a scorecard, something else, during the grant making process? Yes, they use something like this while reviewing applications, maybe as a tool to help them know what to look for. Yes, they use a tool like this after site visits or presentations to capture their impressions. No, there isn't any tool involved at all, or other. And when we think about tools, it's really easy to think about them as being purely quantitative. Sometimes they really can be totally qualitative. And so either way, share what you do, and let's see if we have any results.
I'm just going to hold off 1 minute. I figured out how to solve that polling problem, but I think we may still have some coming in.
Great.
So this is your last chance, if you're going to answer this poll, to complete it now. All right. I am closing the poll, and now everyone should be able to see it. Sarah, do you see it?
I do.
Great.
Hopefully everybody else sees it too. So it looks like a lot of people on this call use some kind of scoring tool, but not all. Once again, it would be great to have people share briefly what their tool is like and how it benefits your process. Could we have someone who uses a tool in the process of reviewing applications? So that first green bar, someone who checked that box, share?
So if you want to share, please press *7 to unmute yourself. So we want to hear someone who does use a rubric or scorecard while reviewing applications. Don't be shy. Sarah, maybe someone wants to share in the next category.
Yeah, sure. So someone, let's open it up, either of those first two categories. Does your program use a review tool or scorecard or rubric before or after site visits? Or maybe both?
Hi, this is Celeste from the Jewish Community Youth Foundation in Princeton. We have like a hybrid approach where we have a packet called the Site Visit Note-Taking Sheet, and then in the packet it has simple questions the students ask themselves when they evaluate each grant, and then they take the packet with them to the site visit, fill out the questions during the site visit, and then they also use this tool afterwards when they present to their group. So it's not really where they're ranking or using numbers. I was also we do this sticker model where each student's given a certain amount of stickers to vote, etc. But we have like a comprehensive note-taking sheet that they carry with them, I would say before, during, and after the process.
Terrific. And Celeste, can I ask you a follow-up question? So how much of it is qualitative and how much of it is quantitative in terms of generating a score?
There's no score generation. With this, the score part comes where the students vote by stickers, and that's a whole different tool. So what we'll do is once the students review all the different grants and they're given 3 stickers to vote, they put that next to the organization about their top 3 to get a visualization of where the group is at in terms of the organizations they'd like to visit. And then we do something similar in terms of funding and not funding organizations after the whole process is over with, all the presentations and stuff like that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I'll also share with you briefly the rubric that we use and what that looks like. And I can provide that to Naomi if anyone would like a copy of it after. So
great. It looks like some people are interested in that.
Oh, great. Okay, fabulous. So our teams kind of each year they take the rubric from the last year's group and they use that as a starting point for what they create as their tool for reviewing proposals. And typically just a couple of teams end up taking a really active role in refining the tool. It is a rubric in that it describes what a proposal that would get a 4 in a certain category looks like, what a 3 would look like, what a 2 would look like, and what a 1 would look like. And the categories that it asks teams to consider include both things specifically about the proposal itself. Is it a good idea? Is it a well-written proposal? Do you have all the information you need? Is the program feasible? What do you think of the outcomes? But also some categories that relate to the organization as a whole. So what's the leadership like? What do their financials look like? Are they in a stable place as an organization? And then that generates, our teams have tended to really be interested in having a score for each proposal. So there's a very straightforward kind of percentage score that comes out of the rubric where the total number of points received is divided by the total number of points possible, and those then translate into A's, B's, C's, and D's. Theoretically, we could have a group that really wanted to abandon that tool and that process and do it very differently, and that would be fine, and they could come up with something completely groundbreaking. But that's the way that it's worked for the last few years. And this is what that looks like for us. So when they come back and debrief at their final funding decisions meeting, they post a piece of paper, that paper you see on the wall behind these teams in the background, and each piece of paper corresponds to one of the proposals, and it includes the score that it received and a reminder of the amount of funding requested. And they post those by categories, the A's, the B's, the C's. If there's anything lower than a C, then those as well. And they use that to guide the conversation that they have reporting back on site visits and ultimately making funding decisions. And when they present on their site visits, each group is asked to cover who they met with, what they learned that was different from the proposal that everyone reviewed, any significant pros and cons, whatever their funding recommendation is and the rationale for it. And in some cases that's that they don't recommend funding or that they recommend partial funding. And then they take questions from their peers. And that is actually the perfect transition for me because that's the end of my presentation. But I would be really happy to answer any questions people have.
Great. So we do have a few questions. The first question, Sarah, is do staff or parents join the teens on site visits? Because as was probably noticed, you have a lot of site visits. I can't imagine you would go on all of them.
No, I have not gone on all of them. So we have one staff person go on each site visit. And up until this year, Rose Youth Foundation had 3 people who staffed the program. I am one of them. Now we are a program staffed by 2 people. And last year, in addition to staff accompanying teens on site visits, we had a Rose Youth Foundation alumni fellow who is a college student but who happened to be in town for spring semester last year, and she staffed some site visits as well. So there always is an adult, quote unquote, in the group who doesn't really play much of an active role. We haven't ever used parents in the past, although I'm sure that you could have success with that model as well.
Sarah, it sounds like that's a great role for an alum as well.
It was, it was fabulous. Samantha was our alumni fellow last year, and she did a spectacular job and loved it and really enjoyed seeing the other side of the experience, although she said it was very challenging to bite her tongue.
That translucence. We have another question. How much time do you give teens for reviewing proposals? I guess that's just in the proposal review phase as opposed to after site visits.
So in the past we've given teens 2 weeks to read through at least the narrative section of every proposal, maybe not necessarily diving into the different attachments and financial documents submitted, but all of the kind of answers to the questions about what will you do and how will you do it and what will the program look like, that piece, a couple of weeks. And we typically tack a little bit of time onto our site visit prep meeting for teens who want to come and read, in our boardroom before the meeting starts.
Great. So thanks, Celeste, for that question. And I have a couple of more questions from Loam in San Francisco. So what is meant by don't come empty-handed to site visits? What do you actually bring?
Oh, good question. Yes, that sounds sort of like we think you should bring a gift on site visits or something, which is not what we do. So that just means that if you're going to a meeting, you should have a copy of the proposal with you. You should have a list of the questions that your group has come up with to ask so you know the plan for the meeting. You should have something to write with and something to write on. And the way that plays out in the site visit from hell is that there's someone who shows up at this site visit meeting and they have nothing. They're just standing there. They have no paper. They have no pen. They don't have the proposal with them. They maybe don't even remember what it was contained, what the proposal had contained. And so that just means kind of be prepared for a meeting, not bring flowers or chocolates.
Sarah, I'm not sure if you covered this one, but when you split the kids into smaller groups for the site visits, how do you set up that sharing out afterwards?
When they come back after the site visits to report back?
Yes.
Each team has about 5 minutes to present and then additional time for Q&A. And it's up to them how they want to divide that up. Some teams will come up and each person will answer one question. One person will cover who they met with and what those people were like. One person will cover the pros and cons. Sometimes a group will just sort of nominate one person to be their spokesperson. And we don't tell them how they need to do it.
Great. So we have a few more questions, and just a reminder, if you have any other questions for Sarah, you can use that chat box. I know one or two people were having trouble with with logging on, so you wouldn't have the chat box. So you can also send any questions to naomi@jtfn.org, and I could ask it that way. So for now, we have Loam. Thanks for you have a handful of questions. So one question is, how do you prepare teens to build rapport on those visits with the person they're meeting with?
That's covered a bit in the site visit from hell skit too, because after this sort of terrible skit plays out, and this is a good question because I didn't cover this, the teens have a conversation about what should have been done differently or what they would have done differently. And so, one is like a handshake and how that should play out, and eye contact. And then in their specific meetings to plan for their site visits, we encourage them to to brainstorm all of the questions they want asked, and then to think about which ones are openers, which ones are conversation builders, and which ones are kind of the hardballs, and how can the hardballs be worded as gently as possible, and where should they really come in the flow of the meeting.
And Sarah, is that skit something that each group prepares, the second years prepare, or do you have like a skit written out?
They prepare it based on their experience, on site visits themselves, and also based on the skit that they saw the year before. And one other thing that I didn't mention about the role of returning members for us, and I think some of you do have programs where there are people who have been in the program before or who have like a senior membership in some way. If we end up with a group of teens signed up for a site visit who are all returning members, meaning they've all been on at least 3 or 4 site visits last year before, we'll ask them if they want a staff person to come with them. But unless they say yes, we just have them go on the site visit by themselves. And they have told us that they really enjoy that. And they tend to come back with really helpful and accurate information, even without a staff person in the room.
That's great. Let me see. This is a good question. How long do you think a site visit should get scheduled for?
It depends a little bit on whether or not there's a chance to observe a program in action, or to kind of take a tour of a facility that may have some relevance. If that's the case, then I would say between an hour and a half and 2 hours. But if it's really just a meeting that's happening in a meeting room at the nonprofit, or if they're an organization that doesn't actually have a facility, sometimes the meeting has to happen in one of our meeting rooms here at the foundation or in a coffee shop. If it's just a conversation, then an hour is usually enough time.
Great. Oh, this is a really good question. I think it's the answer is in the preparation, if I can jump in. But the question is, what techniques or resources do you have to encourage shy teens to ask site visit questions? I know that's a challenge for a lot of programs.
Yeah. Well, so we sort of start with the assumption, and this is a lot of this is really communicated and brought to the group through the co-chairs of the group, not through us as staff. So I think that helps too when their peers are the ones encouraging them to be involved. But we start with the assumption that if you're going on a site visit, you're going to have an active role. You're going to be speaking. And then when the group brainstorms all of the different questions they have, it's not necessarily like, oh, Naomi has this question, she's the one to ask it. It's what are all the questions that we need answers to? And then they divide up who's going to ask what question separately. And we haven't ever had a teen who is so shy that they really aren't willing to ask a question. I think once it's written down and they know where it comes in the flow of the meeting, it may be challenging them a little bit to go outside of their comfort zone, but they do all rise to the occasion.
Great. And I think there was a question just based off of what you just said. Thanks, Deborah, for this question. Can you just clarify, Sarah, what you meant when you said the co-chairs of the group?
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't talk about our leadership structure, but Rose Youth Foundation is truly youth-led, and those of us who staff the program really kind of work as advisors and coaches. But we have 2 co-chairs who are elected at the end of each cycle for the year ahead, and it's their responsibility to plan each meeting and to facilitate each meeting. So they're the leaders of their peers.
Great. I think we have 2 other kind of little technicality pieces. So when do you usually do these site visits? Like, does your group meet on weekends, during the week? I know you said the scheduling is rough.
So most of the site visits happen at the end of the day on weekdays, because we've found that it's easier for most of the organizations that we've met with over the year to have a meeting at the end of a workday, even if it means extending their workday until like 5:30 or 6 o'clock, than it is for them to have a meeting on the weekend. But we do sometimes have organizations that are willing to meet on Sundays. We don't really do much on Saturdays with Rose Youth Foundation ever. So if there's an organization that would meet on a Sunday, we may end up with a couple of site visits that happen on the weekend, and those can be great for teams who just have super jammed schedules during the week.
Great. And another little technicality is you mentioned that you had an alumni who staffed the site visit. What age was that alumni? How much older than the teens that are in your foundation?
She was a sophomore in college last spring, and she was especially mature. But yeah, she was a sophomore in college. She didn't look that much older than the teens she was chaperoning, but in their interactions with her, I think because she had been a part of Rose Youth Foundation before and because she was a college student, they seemed comfortable having her in that sort of advisor role.
Terrific. So I think the last question that's been out there from a couple of people is how can we see the rubric that you use? So I know you offered to share it with us. And I'll point out that a little earlier in the chat box, Andrew also shared with you a rubric from another program whose program leaders on our call as well. And that is posted already on our website. Maybe Sarah can also share that with us, and we can post it and we can share out some of these resources when we send the follow-up email about the call, probably tomorrow. Does that sound good, Sarah?
That sounds great, yeah. We'd
Great.
be happy to share that stuff.
We will be sharing those resources with you, which is a terrific thing to come from this phone call. We also noted that there is interest in working with returning members, and so JTFN is working on a program either most likely during the JTFN Summit or maybe another webinar about that topic. So look out for that. And I really want to thank you, Sarah, for such a great presentation, and I want to thank everyone else as well for all of the questions that you sent in. I could tell that this is really a hot topic because people have lots that they want to talk about this. So I want to tell you about a few upcoming events before we move to that discussion portion the follow-up portion of this call, which is going to be for the next 20 minutes or so. First, I just want to let you know that our next webinar will be on integrating collective giving into your individual giving program, especially for program leaders of beneath EDIC or individual giving programs, and that is on February 20th. As always, you can see all the dates in our events category on our website, so they're easy to find at jtfn.org. And finally, and most importantly, get out your calendars now and save the date for the Jewish Teen Philanthropy Summit, which is June 9th to 10th in New York City. We will be opening registration and providing many more details in February. And excitingly, we're hosting a brainstorming call where you can tell us what types of topics you want to learn at the summit. And that call is next Thursday, January 23rd from 3 to 4 p.m. So please email me at naomi@jtfn.org, and I will put that in the chat if you're interested in that call. We'd love to have a lot of people contribute to the ideas that we're going to work into our planning for this summit in June. In a moment, I'm going to turn off the recording and open the lines for those 20 minutes of informal discussion and sharing on this topic. I hope that many of you will stick around for that, but I do want to thank Sarah once again as part of this greater group. So thank you to Sarah, and hang on while I turn off that recording.
Thank you. Please stand by.